Hello and welcome to the June 28th meeting of the Budget Task Force Subcommittee on Budget Challenges and Potential Sources of Revenue. The other, our teammates and our counterparts are meeting also right now, and then we'll join together at the end for kind of a general check-in on schedule. Maybe what we can do is, I know that there's been more work done on the piece that Dan's tackling and the piece that Shannon and I are tackling. Maybe Dan, if you could take us through what you've done, what's new, and then Shannon can do the same. And we can talk about what needs to be added or taken away. Or
that sounds good. So Erica made that spreadsheet last week with or actually Monday with the budget challenges and new revenues, which let me put this on my screen. I started playing with and expanded a bit. So I think this works as sort of a good checkoff tool for when we get information we can add in here and start to build the budget from this. So going through, I added additional columns to go through all the years here. So FY24, and we're looking to go through FY29 with our projection. So I did fill out all these columns. And then we are missing a lot of numbers at this point in time, but I think we have a schedule for when we'll be able to get these figures in there. And then for the descriptions, I actually plugged in some of the narrative that I wrote on that document from Monday to kind of have centralized in one place. It's a little bit briefer, but it's out there. But so for example, for this, we know for electricity costs, we're gonna have a $149,000 increase in FY25 and again in 26. But these are actually for natural gas. Again, these are actually put these in the wrong column here. They should go like this. So we're going to see a $60,000 increase next year, and again in FY25, the bulk of it's going to be a $238,000 overall increase. So these are kind of like the net; they're building upon each other. Cumulative. We could do it either way, I guess, but it's nice to know that we're going to need a certain amount of money in FY26. That's really, so you break it out. We know we're going to have a total budget impact of $536,000 for electricity and gas in FY26. See here. So for like the collective bargaining contracts, what I'm working on is I'm actually trying to go through each of the analysis I have for each union. I'm going to add spreadsheets that puts it out through FY29. So using like Erica's goal here, we could plug in an assumption that's probably on the lower end, one that's on the higher end, and one that's usually par for the course for how we go for contracts. It's quite a lot of work. It'll probably take me 2 or 3 weeks, but that the data is going to be super accurate if we do it this way. So it'll save me work later on too. So I'm currently working on that. I got about halfway through one of the unions this morning. And then again, with the school contracts, as those are settled, I think we can start to build in the actual cost of the contracts according to Jenny and Chris. So it'll be helpful to start to have those here.
yeah, we should think about. I was going to say so we had some conversation in the negotiation session when we were in canvassing. Basically, when we were apart confidentially from the teachers, we were talking about how do we talk about this data and what do we use where. So I think what we'll ask, I know what we've asked the schools to do so far is to give us the numbers for the competitive market basket that they're in, the average of the market baskets that they're in. And so we'll decide once they give us those numbers what we want to put in terms of most likely or less likely or max. It's a little bit tricky to think about because we're still targeting to get to that number. We'll have the floor of whatever the agreement is if the agreement settles like it looks like it's going to. It looks like the agreement will probably settle the first day of school. So there's more negotiation, but the union won't vote until then. So in any case, we'll get the data and be able to figure out how to place it in this chart once we have it.
Okay, even if we lump like town and school together as just one line item here, I think that could work as a kind of a broad. So we're not identifying which union goes with which funding too. So it could be something like that. If we're given a range, it's very broad.
Yeah, that'll help. And Dan, are you using the average for the benchmark groups when you're looking at these various unions coming up with target?
So last time, we don't have the analysis completed for this fiscal year. We have them done for last year. So we were all looking pretty good with the settlements we had. We're all, hovering around the average point. So moving forward, I have not done the market for each of those. They usually take, 3-4 days, and with some unions, we actually sit together and go through it, the contract. So it is quite a process to do that. So I'm not sure if we can get new markets done, but we can use assumptions on the current markets we have too. And take a peek at other contracts and see what, 2-3% looks like extrapolated from that. So we still have good information. It's just to get this done in time, it might not be possible to get markets for each union completely done.
Yeah, understood. And we may have to pick the kind of biggest ones that are most likely to change, or the ones that are most likely to have a financial impact.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that caught us off guard on the teacher side was in the past 3 or 4 years, the average COLAs in the market basket groups spiked above 2 to more like 2.5%, which was not something we'd seen in history. So I don't know if you're going to see that with any of the other unions you're looking at.
Yeah, we did see that. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're looking at the trailing 3 years or 5 years or whatever to help inform that.
Mm-hmm. Going on here, health insurance trust. So I did reach out to Pam Hicks today, wrote her an email to send to our advisors, which is Hub Inc., to try to see if we can get, a recommended funding option for 24, and to see if he can give us projections based on market on what we're looking at in future years. So with the trust, it's very tough because it's based on our claims, and our claims go hot and cold. So this could be quite the wide range that we have coming up, but right now we're running pretty hot with the claims. So there may be some more immediate budgetary need in the near future with this certain account.
Yeah, not a surprise that healthcare would be at various points accelerating much faster than 2.5%.
Yeah, the trend has always been higher with healthcare, so it's usually around 7 to 9%, and it could be running higher now with inflation. So, but I did ask for a response back by July 12th, so that will give them some time to work on it, and we can plug in the numbers when they come back. New growth. So we're wrapping up the end of the year. I did speak with the assessors for FY24 at least. They have at least 700,000 in new growth that they've already accounted for, and that doesn't include personal property. So we actually contract out for that with Patriot Properties. So once we get that in, I mean, we usually see between 50 and 250,000 in new growth from personal property. So we'll get that back. We can update this. Fire trucks, and we usually have this finalized in September, but we should have a pretty good idea where we'll be about. We usually submit a pretty clean report to the DOR. We usually don't have a lot of things that are disallowed. So, and then we're on to the other the school expenses here, the bus contract. Again, it's all about timing, going out to bid before we get the numbers. Chris, I don't know if you and Jenny have projections for this, that if we want to add them to the spreadsheet, we could do that, or?
So we don't have that to add right yet, only because we're just still not sure exactly what that's going to look like when we actually have to go out to bid, but we'll have it in the fall. We can look back at that again and see if there's something that we can add in there, but I didn't anticipate we'd be putting something specifically there until we've been able to go out to bid.
I would think it's probably not that important to have a specific number, but just for us to allocate our time and how much time do we put into explaining various things. It'd be good if we just had any kind of rough bogey.
Okay.
It's very helpful for me to know that the special ed tuitions is going to be a big number.
Yes.
Because that'll shape the way we organize ourselves a little bit.
That's true.
So Jenny had put in here that other communities saw about 495 per bus, which is like 11% range. Like we could use that for now and
Right.
alter when we go forward and put a range of 8 to 15, whatever it might be.
That's, yeah, Dan, I was misunderstanding, thinking that you wanted something different than what is in that description right there, but we can, as that estimate, we can roll that out. It was something beyond that information we didn't have.
Yeah, we won't know until we have the bid. So that's kind of the nature of the timing of this. We never have perfect information all the time. So it's
Gotcha.
always rolling in.
Dan, in
Right.
terms of new growth, how are you thinking about, I mean, new growth is sort of spiky. How are you thinking about how we'd forecast that for fiscal year 25, 26?
So usually the minimum we have is about 700,000. So on average, it's been about $1 million over those past 10 years, but 850 is a little safer. That's what we've been seeing. But a lot of it depends on what happens with that MBTA multifamily grant. That could spark some real growth in those zones if that happens, and we could be seeing some substantial new growth. It's tough to say. So each year, I send out a request to the land use and the assessing department to ask them to go through the list of projects that are out there that permits have been pulled, and to give a rough estimate on the timing of when they think they're going to be completed, and then a rough estimate on the assessment of those properties. And it gives a range back to us. So I'm happy to do that again, but for something 5 years out, I think we're stuck with an average, I think, just because people haven't pulled permits and we can't predict what people are going to build.
Yeah, I think being on the conservative side of some justifiable, but kind of conservative estimates probably best for this purpose.
All right.
Can I ask a clarifying question quickly? Sorry, I was late, everybody. We just ended a negotiation session. When we looked at this the other day, I was thinking we were just looking at FY25 and beyond. So the fact that there's an FY24 category in here and we already have our FY24 budgets approved, then we can just put those exact numbers in, correct? And then we're moving forward. Is that the expectation?
Yeah, if there's no substantial increase, like for solid waste and recycling, I'm not going to put anything in for 24 because there's, we don't know if there's going to be.
Okay.
The new contract starts in 25, so I was going to fill that in. All right. 25. But if there are any changes that come up in 24, it's a good place just to show those, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Or we could get rid of it. It's not a. I just did it on the fly today. That's all.
Why don't we leave it, but just have the expectation that no one should do any work to put anything in 24? Like if you have the number, you can drop it in. That's interesting, but don't go out and gather new data. Or I guess that wouldn't be the case anyway. It's already in the budget, but
right.
But I guess to your point, Chris, if we feel like we're edging towards an agreement with Union A, I guess we wouldn't put anything in here. This is a public meeting, so we wouldn't put anything in here for a bit. But once the contract settled, if it did settle around the first day of school, we would put, I guess we'll have to figure out, we were talking earlier in the meeting, we'll have to put what the contract is, I guess, is sort of the minimum. And then to the extent the contract does not bring it all the way to the market basket average in the market baskets that we're using, we'll have to figure out how we'll calculate that number and figure out how to incorporate that in this model.
Right. And when I look at that, we also have all of them in one column too. So that in itself, you're right, Tom, that'll be part of the variability. What is the settled contract? What is the target to get them where they need to be as well too?
Okay, and Dan can work with Jenny to get
Yeah.
Sort of best estimates for these school related ones.
Yeah.
You put inflation on here, which is pretty interesting. There's a bunch of, I'm wondering where else we need to make assumptions around inflation besides COLA changes for salary union packages. Because I guess we'll have the way the energy contracts work, we're actually, I guess we won't know our usage, but we'll know the rate. So we wouldn't have an inflation figure there because the rate would already be set in the contract.
Yeah, I threw it in there just because I thought it might impact something, but if it doesn't, then that's okay.
You know, it probably will. It's a good idea to put it in there, Erica. I think we've made mistakes in budgeting before, either using a plug we've always used or, you know, not thinking carefully about it. So that's a good reminder.
There could be other like building maintenance contracts that go up more than a standard percentage as well. That could be encapsulated with this as well. So we're seeing the cost of everything go up.
Right.
We'll talk about this in the bigger group, but we had a conversation in earlier about, I already mentioned this, Chris, that we're sort of talking about how we talk about this and where do we share information? Because, for example, in the competitive salaries block, that's going to be a big number, and we're going to have to give some, you know, basic benchmark information without violating the confidentiality of any negotiations to
Right.
help people understand where those numbers come from.
So and Tom, I was able to have the conversation that you and I had quickly talked about too. And so moving forward, we'll begin to be able to start sharing just the market basket data that we have been using. It's not about specific proposals, so it's not about the negotiations. It'll be, this is all the raw data, and this is the average. And so this is where, you know, this is what the target is. So I think we'll be able to start bringing that to these conversations and putting those specific numbers in.
Okay, so maybe in a future meeting, it sounds like probably some work probably need to take the presentation that was given an executive session to the select board and the FinCom and the school committee. Just give it a careful look to make sure we're not disclosing anything related to the negotiation, and then maybe share with this group in a future meeting.
Yeah.
Just go through it together for everyone that hasn't seen it yet,
Yep.
which is
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
okay. So that'll take a fair amount of time. So we'll have to block out a good sized block in some future meeting for that.
Sounds good.
Okay, so this looks great. So thank you, Erica and Dan, for doing this. This is a very useful dashboard for us to keep track of what we're missing. And I think in terms of the narrative section, I think Dan's narrative was pretty complete, except for the places we hadn't yet decided really how to talk about it. Like there was sort of a very high level competitive salary thing. We're gonna have to sort of build that out. But we can, sounds like we've already bitten off one piece of that. I guess, Dan, are you far enough along with any of the other unions to, I guess not, to get a sense of how significant, you know, bringing them to average of their market baskets would be in terms of dollars?
So at their last contract, I think we're in a pretty good place with every contract. So it's just a matter of what happens in the meantime, which is, you know, other communities are settling now. So, but we're settled through FY25, which is great. But, you know, the impact of what happens after that, it's hard to say just because we haven't seen a complete market of what other communities have done at this point. That's something we can keep an eye on.
So if we see COLAs accelerating, then we will know that and can incorporate that, but we're not going to know much else. Except for the firefighters, I guess, which are coming right up.
Yeah, so we'll probably work on a market with the firefighters and go forward from there, which has worked well in the past.
Okay. I guess we probably don't need to. I'm wondering if we want to take a look at just the narrative piece that you developed, Dan, but it sounds like if most of the focus has been here, I think the main questions on the narrative side were sort of small questions on what we're going to use for estimates, and then these bigger questions around the competitive pay piece.
Yeah, I didn't work too much on the narrative. I shifted focus to this spreadsheet so we can get some numbers down. But
no, this is great. I think it's a really good way to look at it. So, and it'll help us keep track of the numbers we're still looking for. So maybe for the next meeting, subcommittee meeting, Chris, if we could ask Jenny to give us some time to help populate the school related ones, you know, we'll be well on our way, I think.
Sounds good.
Okay, why don't we Go ahead.
Dave, do you mean to move over the text for the special sped tuitions? It got moved over.
Oh, thank you. Undo.
Perfect.
Right, much better. Okay, why don't we hop over, and Dan, if you want to share the document that Janice sent out earlier. The other piece of this is breaking apart the new revenue source items, and she and I are splitting them up to go do our research and create our blocks. I guess the question for this group is, maybe Shannon, you can just take us through it once it's up. Is there anything that we're missing? Because Shannon did a great job trying to make sure we captured everything that was relevant from all the different towns that we pulled information from, but we could easily have missed something, or there may be some question that the public has that we want to anticipate.
Yeah, so if you scroll down, Dan, I just kind of took those pieces and just put them into a chart, and then Tom and I are going to split them up to come up with like a description. And first of all, are we doing it already? Is there, and if we are, is there room to modify and change it? If not, then obviously we can remove it, right? It's not a potential revenue. If there is the ability to change it, then we can add in what we could do, like increasing a fee or, whatnot. If it doesn't exist, then, obviously including a few sentences of a description, and then starting to try to flesh out what is the impact. I don't know that we're, for the next meeting, we'll have a huge in-depth dollar amount impact, but we're targeting at least to get a description of every single revenue stream, and maybe some generalized idea like high, low, high, medium, low impact. And then we'll need to flesh that out a little bit more. So I just kind of took apart what was in each, what I had pulled from the other groups and the other towns. So the facility rentals, a possible more formalized composting program, increases to fees, licenses, or permits, the idea of cannabis, which I know right now we don't allow for, the pay-as-you-use trash fees. Will that have any impact? Do we have short-term rental fees, split tax rates, meal tax, real estate transfer fees, room occupancy fee charges, any additional cell tower rentals? I think we have a few of those already. School activity fees, solar panel fields, the naming bylaws, any expansion potentially of the property tax work-off program, economic development, and then originally I missed the most obvious one, potential of a Proposition 2.5 override. So Tom and I will spend some time just trying to build out like a description of each one that we would be able to include in the document. So I don't know if anyone else had other thoughts of things that maybe was on somebody else's mind, or things I've heard from the public, or anything we should add to this list.
I want to point out just two things from the data gathering piece of it, that, the one is that the high, low numbers would be, what's kind of like the 90% and the 10%. So we don't have to think of like what could possibly be if everything went perfect or everything went awful, like just, that. And then the most likely doesn't have to be the midpoint. I just want to point out, it can be what we think is the most likely, and the most likely could be closer to one end or the other, depending on level of optimism. So that's one point. And then also on the sheet to record like numbers that we think we might get for possible revenue, amounts. There is a notes column that would allow for being able to identify undesirable consequences or positive consequences, obviously, is the numbers. But, for instance, if we were to increase the meals tax, we might dissuade new restaurants in town. If we were to, bring in cannabis, we might bring in more, whatever it is. I mean, if there are notes regarding foreseeable consequences, we can capture that, I think, both in our thinking and in our reports. So that's something also to consider filling in.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Erica, to talk about. Like, if you pick cannabis, that's an interesting one, because for the towns that have done it, it's a big number, a couple $1 million.
Yeah, that's what I've been reading.
And so, but Westford initially took an absolute, like, that's not a fit for our community. And
Yeah, my thought, sorry, Tom, my thought process, I think I assigned that one to myself because I was thinking about it already, was maybe to be able to, in the description, pull some of the numbers we've seen, projected numbers from other towns that are listed in some of those documents. Because, and I look back and it's like, we decided not to do it 5 years ago when it was kind of an unknown. And I was also thinking that maybe including in that paragraph, like, basically the fact that you can drive 2 miles to get to a cannabis store, right? And that we're basically giving our revenue, potential revenue, to Lowell and Tingsboro and all the surrounding communities that are doing it, right? Back when we originally voted on it, and I'm not saying I sway from a political perspective one way or the other, but from a dollar amount perspective, that could be a huge revenue source. And we're basically right now just giving it to the neighboring towns, right, that have implemented it. So I was thinking something along the lines of just pointing out some of that dollar amounts and then the surrounding towns that are doing it, and what the, 1 mile from Westford, there's within a 5 mile radius of Westford, there's 16 cannabis locations, right? And we have other towns locally that are taking that potential revenue.
yeah, I think just helping people put a dollar sign on the choice that we're making is a good idea. The real estate transfer fee, which I'm still looking into, is another one that could generate a lot of money, but it would have it would basically make it more expensive to move into Westford, which I'm not sure is our target for the town right now. So, but we could put a dollar number on it and say, this is, if we did it like these other 4 towns have done it, here's how much it would generate. But we're pretty concerned about these, exacerbating the already problematic, affordability crisis. And so we'll work on filling those out. I think, Shannon, if I'm right, we've got a tentative due date for our stuff for the 12th, which is 2 weeks from today.
Yes.
Or for a draft, won't be done, but so. Any other comments on this? We'll obviously need a lot of help from folks to understand, anything that we're missing. A lot of you may have more subject matter knowledge on these than we do, so we may have to catch up a bit.
I was just going to add, Tom, for Shane, I saw that you have both school activity fees and then the facility rental fees. And so if you want to reach out to me, I can share, like, I shared that we already have a facility rental fee process in place for the schools. And so sharing that information with you might help as you're looking at whether expanding that or whether that would be applicable to other town buildings or not. Just let me know. Be happy to connect.
I'll definitely do that. And again, these are things we might just decide where we want to be. Maybe we don't want to charge more for activity fees,
Right. But it'd be good to just have again, as we're talking about it, as you're trying to create a narrative.
We got to create the narrative that we looked at all the different avenues.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, the schools in the past year have probably done a study of fees and maybe even have a deck from a school committee meeting where that was discussed that they can send to you to peruse. Okay. The other item I think we have as one of our subcommittee action items is to, we decided we may want to piggyback on the towns that are selected for interviews. And we may want to, we did want to develop a question list. I'm not sure I don't recall. I don't think we assigned that to anybody.
I think we talked about responding to their questions and maybe adding to their question list as opposed to creating one, since we knew that they were already starting that process.
Yeah, and also I think Shannon and I will find that some of these things will want to talk to people that have already implemented them to figure out what it was like. So for us, it may be a little bit different process than here's a best practice community and we really want to learn what they've done. It may be more like, here's something we haven't considered. Let's talk. We want to call the 2 people that have implemented it and learn kind of the good and the bad about it.
Yeah, speaking on the real estate transfer fee, I think Brookline was the primary person that was considering it. I don't know if they've implemented it yet, but that might be somebody that we might want to chat with to see where they are in that process. Did they do it? And I think Kristen might have mentioned Nantucket does it. So maybe that's somewhere too. Because I think especially where we have potential high dollar, arguable, things that people are going to argue potentially passionately for or against, might be good areas to talk to folks. So maybe one or two of the towns that have surrounding towns that have implemented the cannabis and how that's going. Have they seen increase in, and I think in some cases those questions are going to be targeted, right? I might have different questions for somebody when I want to talk to them about cannabis than you would for real estate tax. We might want to talk about increased crime, things like that people might be concerned about if we reconsider those or consider those topics again.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Shannon, now that you're saying that, I completely agree. For that piece, it's probably going to be calls around specific revenue items that we're interested in learning if they've been successful or what problems they've seen. Okay, so when we get back together, all of us, maybe we can go through quickly what we're doing on the budget challenge side, what we're doing on the new revenue source side, how we're thinking about polling other groups. We'll talk about how we want to treat next week. I don't know if a lot of people are going to be away or not. Whether we want to focus next week on doing the subcommittee work and get back together the following week, or whether we want to have a meeting. We will deal with that. We'll also talk about the public session, just pinning down a date so we can begin to build an agenda for that. Any other thoughts we want to cover? It would be fine if we were finished, if we want to just, go dark for 15 minutes until everyone else is ready. We can fill the time. Yep. Erica?
One of the things that I had volunteered, and it really was for the next session, but I did just want to bring it up here. I shared with Dan the planning spreadsheet because I had an action from last week's meeting to flesh that out a little bit. So I don't know if you guys wanted to look at that at all. What I did is I started off with, saying, okay, what deliverables do we have? What do we have to create that's for public consumption? So it included the presentation, the report, in progress updates. And again, this is for the whole committee, not just us, but some of our items are down here. And I broke it out into sections. Some of these sections, I think introduction and our methodology and our background, we can start writing those now, right? Right. They don't have to wait. In progress updates, we're going to have to be briefing FinCom, Select Board, School Committee. So there's, items for there. And then I figured we'd want to be able to also identify any alternatives that are under consideration so we can get feedback on those. Getting down into data gathering, that's the stuff that we're doing now. So both on the town side and on the school side, it just lists essentially what we're doing, but it atomic steps, right? It's saying, here are the baby steps so that we can really kind of get a grasp of the magnitude of what we're trying to do on each of these. And I think we also, if we see when we're looking, so these are the market basket communities. So again, talking with those folks, we probably already thought of all this, but if we see outliers, we want to try to understand them a little bit to see, are they doing something, if the outlier is they're very low on a particular budget item, we'd want to say, what are you doing over there? Maybe they're not considering something, or maybe they're super efficient, right? So, trying to understand the drivers, same for the schools, keep on scrolling. Then we have various outreach items that we've been talking about. So some is the suggestion box, talking to our department heads, and I put, like the dates up here. And the dates, I thought I froze the top line, so I'm surprised that didn't.
I'll do that. Give me 1 second here. There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I did put dates in. I'm thinking that we're going to have to go, I did put the dates for like the updates from the schedule that Dan created. So those dates are on here. The public forums that are on that schedule that Dan created are on here. We had talked about a strategic retreat. I'm a huge fan. I think getting that in front of the people so that they're not shocked if we start talking about cuts, right, or higher taxes, both of those two things are shocking, and the more that we can do to get the public socialized with those concepts, I think the better. So I put items in there that we would want to plan it out, and then, incorporate feedback that we get. And then you can scroll a little further, updates to those boards as well as outreach beyond Westford. So both efficiencies and new revenues. I think we've been talking about maybe targeting them. So those might be different sets of communities. Some of them might overlap, but, working through that. Okay, you can keep scrolling. Okay, then getting down to the analysis. This is a lot of what we've talked about. I volunteered to try to create that tool. So that's something that it's still on my plate. So I'm hoping to also get that done by the 12th of July. And then estimating these costs is stuff that we're doing right now. I don't know, I maybe optimistically thought that we could get numbers in there for the 12th of July, but we can tweak that. And then creating scenarios. So one thing, so the hardship scale is to say, are we creating any hardship on a department or on a taxpayer? So I thought that might be something that would be, it was just a concept. I haven't figured out how to incorporate it into the tool, but it might be something that would help us create the scenarios, because I think we probably want to have a range of scenarios. And I think what I said here was, scenarios ranging from, lower service, but minimum tax impact up to, level service or even higher service, but higher tax impact, right? So those would be kind of the range of scenarios that we're trying to achieve. And then the last thing here is the size of the budget reserve. I'm suggesting that we might consider having a budget reserve, because if we identify, okay, here's all the most likelies for our revenue sources as well as our challenges. And when we come up and we try to use these scenarios to close that gap, and we say, okay, our most likely scenario, we're good. But most likelies, we're not going to get 100% of the most likelies to happen, right? And sometimes it could be that our worst case scenarios in one line item or another come to fruition, or our revenue sources in one line or another, come out great, right? But either way, we might want to have kind of a, we right now have a finance committee reserve fund, and we might want to size it specifically to be able to handle some of the difference between most likely and max budget gap. And that might allow us to assure our department heads that we know that you want to budget for worst case scenarios, because you don't want to be caught holding the bag for some reason. But if we have this, reserve, and we use it specifically to handle some of this gap that I've talked about, then that might make it easier to work with them for lower numbers than they might otherwise feel comfortable with. So that's my thinking. All right, so I'm done.
That looks great. So sort of getting a Gantt chart together for the whole project is really, really a super idea. So let's definitely do this. I'm wondering what would we ask people to do? I guess we'd ask each subcommittee to populate this in more detail, and then send a version of it back to Dan and Kristen to kind of make a master. I guess I propose we just start using this. It looks like it's in great shape, and we maybe assign this out for the different subcommittees to think about in terms of the timing.
Yeah, one thing that I want to point out is one of the challenges in using Excel, because I'm used to using Microsoft Project, but I don't have it on my home computer. And I'm retired, so I don't have it at all anymore. I can't link things, at least I don't know how to link things well in Excel, so that you can see, okay, if we want to make sure that by the time we get to a public forum, we want to be able to tell them these things. We can't say, make sure we're done by, point X.
Right.
Just one of the challenges. So if you guys have a tool that you think would be better that allows us, or if we haven't, I don't know what to do about that. I'm just expressing that we don't really have the linkages and the little lines that say, okay, this feeds that item.
Dan, do you know if the town has or uses any kind of project management software like Microsoft Project?
No, we don't have any of that, just the Excel and the basic Microsoft package, but yeah, Eric, I don't mind sitting with you and kind of seeing if you have ideas, and I'm pretty good at Excel, so if we want to try to accomplish something, we can set something up if you want.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
There might be a free online tool for this level of complexity. I haven't looked into that at all, so I might be wrong, but
True, that's possible.
I don't know if there's a Google Sheets equivalent to for project management, but why don't we start with this, even though it doesn't have a lot of the linkages that you're talking about, because I think that's pretty helpful. So let's assign that to the two groups. And one, I guess, two quick things that are details is we did agree last night at the select board meeting that one of the strategic retreat topics would be the budget task force, and probably the format will be a round robin. Well, there'll be 4 or 5 sections where people can pick the top 2 or 3 they want to go to, and we'll run 15 minutes, blow a whistle. People can go to the next one that they're interested in, run another 15 minutes, blow the whistle, and then switch again.
Fantastic.
So we can think a little bit about how to best capture input in the most useful way. And then I like the idea of the budget reserve. I don't know, Dan, I guess we could put that in the budget challenge categories as a specific item, just to say we're in an environment of increasing uncertainty, and we now think the responsible FinCom reserve is no longer $100,000 or whatever it is, but should be $500,000.
Yeah, with the FinCom reserve, the only thing is it's supposed to be for unknowns and emergencies. So those are usually a criteria for appropriations from there. But there's other ways to create budget capacity that maybe isn't appropriate, or maybe it's like some sort of stabilization fund too that could occur. But yeah, it's definitely good to have some room there to maneuver.
Yeah, you'll have a better idea of where to put it. So stabilization fund might make more sense, but something that enters the regular budgeting process as an allocated line item that, yeah, gives us more capacity to absorb surprises. Okay, well, good. Thank you, Erica, for putting that in. I think this is great. So I'll add this to the list for the larger group to kind of help populate this Gantt chart. What else? Anything else we want to make sure we either capture in this group or talk about with a larger group? Okay, Dan, maybe you can bring us back to Brady Bunch view. And Dan, is the other group going to join us here when they're done?
Yeah, they're coming to us, so we can just, if we're going to take a break for a few, we can just turn our screens off, but I'm going to leave the meeting running. So don't leave the meeting.
Yeah, please don't leave the meeting. Why don't we just pause for now? We can do whatever we were going to do for the next 12 minutes, and I'll see you back here at 1:30.
Great.
Sounds good.
See you soon.
Hello, you are joining or rejoining the June 28th meeting of the Westford Budget Task Force, now all together. What we'll do is we'll do a quick update from each of the working groups and the kind of action items that they're working on, moving towards sort of how does it look so far, what's our delivery date, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the public session that we're hoping to put together, our appearance at the strategic town meeting in early September. Erica's put together a project management Gantt chart, which I think could be pretty helpful for us to keep track of all these threads. So we'll just show you what that looks like, and we may ask the subcommittees to populate that between now and the next meeting. We'll talk about what we want to do for next week in terms of meeting, because we could either spend the time doing our subcommittee work, or we could get together or just plan to do a check-in midweek, if that's helpful. We ordinarily would be approving minutes. We're not going to do that today. We're going to approve the set of minutes from last time and this time in our next meeting altogether. So haven't forgotten about it, but we're not going to do that today. Why don't we kick off with an update from the benchmarking efficiency group? Valerie, I don't know if you want to lead that or if you want to ask someone else to take that on.
Kristen, do you mind? I feel like you wrapped up the last meeting with the
Sure. No worries. And please, anyone from our group, please jump in if I go too fast over anything or miss anything. So we wanted to provide the larger team with an update on where we stand related to benchmarking, data collection, and questions that we have for Westford departments as well as other municipalities. So when we last met as a group, I think we had all agreed on for the school benchmarking that we'd be using the the DART Plus communities. And we have agreed to that in our benchmarking group. Related to the municipal benchmark communities, we reviewed those. Christina had pulled some initial data for us, and we determined to take out the town of Wakefield. We feel that we just could not get the data that we needed to in an easily accessible manner. And then we actually discussed adding some additional municipalities. At first, there was 3 municipalities on the table, and we had further discussion. And we have decided to include Franklin and Shrewsbury to the municipal benchmark communities. And after doing further research based upon that inclusion, we feel even more confident that those 2 communities will help us in our research and help us with some solutions moving forward. So just wanted to provide that update related to the benchmarking communities. Are there any questions on that matter? Erica?
Yeah, I have a question now. So just so that we can explain to the public, if we are doing any sort of benchmarking that impacts our decision-making, what criteria were used and was it applied objectively?
Yep. So for the majority of the municipalities, it is the benchmarking communities that the municipal side has used in terms of contract negotiations for our labor staff over time. And then the addition of Franklin and Shrewsbury, they are slightly larger in population. However, they're both full service municipalities with water, sewer, stormwater. We know that Westford does not have sewer, but that's a little bit different. The form of government in Shrewsbury is manager select board form. Franklin is a little bit different in terms of council manager form of government, but both are very proximate to highways and have similar services and similar demographic populations in terms of more Asian Indian population, similar to Westford and the like. So we can certainly work through our group on getting some firmer information and data on why those benchmark communities are named, because I know we can't just go on a feeling. It has to be, set in some sort of metric.
Ideally, yeah. Agreed.
I agree. When we, sometime between now and our final report, we'll have a table, I think, that includes population, size, services, range, median income, whatever we decide are the right yardsticks to use.
Yep, and we already have that data collected. It's just Vibhu has been working tirelessly to get us more visuals, which has been super helpful. He gave us a preview earlier today, and we're really impressed with that way to visualize it. So we look forward to sharing that with the larger group when the time is right. We're also looking at, with these benchmark communities, of certain outliers that may be similar or different. So as an example, library hours. So on our benchmark communities, Westford actually has the least amount of hours open for a library in those communities. Some municipalities are much, much higher because they might have separate branches for library or other services. We're also looking at times that town hall is open and times that the council on aging might be open and available. So looking at that. So it's a little bit more nuanced data. We're looking at what municipalities have combined facilities departments, combined public works departments, combined fleet maintenance, and how we portion that out. We're looking at health insurance and how towns, either they're self-insured or fully insured, or they're with a conglomerate of some sort. And the other areas that we're finding, there's some areas that we need to explore further is do they have an ambulance service, or do they lease that out, or do they have some other arrangement? And how much do they pull in for from the general fund for more traditional revolving fund areas such as recreation and other areas? And then we're looking at areas where municipalities have regionalization services where Westford does not, or vice versa, and what that might look like in the future for that. And then we have come with a list of questions for our departments that we want to ask, similar to what does your department provide today that is unique to Westford and not usually provided in other communities? What services do we not provide, but other communities provide that we wish we did? What are other areas that your department feels that they could cut costs, and what would that look like? What areas do we think we could increase services, and what would that look like? And then suggestions for regionalization. So that's really where we're at now. We still have a lot of data to collect and comb through, and we are working on, once we go through a little bit more data, we think we'll be prepared next week of what municipalities we contact on the outside to ask them questions and go forward. But we also wanted to hear from the other team of what municipalities they might want to reach out to in terms of revenue. So we're making those calls or contacts at the same time and being consistent with that. Did I miss anything from our team that you want to add?
In terms of interview questions, I think we'll think about interview questions and maybe piggyback where appropriate on the communities that you're planning to speak with. When we looked at it, a lot of the benchmarking questions for us might be pretty specific. Like if we're looking at a new revenue raising opportunity, we probably would want to call the communities that have done that and understand the benefits and shortcomings. So we may have a little bit more of a piecemeal approach or targeted approach, depending on what the revenue item is or the budget challenge is. If there is a community that you think is sort of best in class in terms of creative revenue management, we could certainly do a sort of a community-wide questioning of them. But it looks like a lot of the questions we're going to have will be specific to revenue items that we don't have yet that other communities have implemented. Okay, well, that's great. So, on the school side, we know what the benchmark set is, and I think we know at least partially where the data is and what data is available. I don't know if there's anything to comment on there.
I just want to add something because I found out the data set from DESI website yesterday because the DESI website's data set is not really organized in the same place. I found out the DESI's data set organized by each state function code. So we do have the data set over there. I'm going to send that data set to Weibo so he can help us to visualize that data set. So he said it will probably just take one day so we can see something similar to the town side to visualize the school expenditure by each state function code.
Okay, great. That sounds
That
really
would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So thank you for that update. Maybe what we'll do now is have Dan, maybe with Erica's support, go through the budget challenge. It's probably most useful to go through the spreadsheet, I would think, that contains most of the info. Do you agree, Dan?
Sure, I'll give a high-level overview of what we're doing here. I'm just going to share my screen. So Erica came up with a basis for a spreadsheet, and we expanded it a bit for all the budget challenges and new revenue projections. So basically what was listed in the outline is all the issues are listed here on the left-hand side. I did have a Word document that we started with where I started writing a narrative because it's easier to start with, but then Erica developed this, so we're bouncing over this. So I think the goal is to try to fill in estimates for most of these costs here. So like with solid waste and recycling, we're hoping to have a contract by the end of July, so we can start to populate these the cells here. Electricity and natural gas, we already know what's going to happen in the outlying years, so we pop those in. What Erica's chart does is that it has a sort of a minimum impact likelihood, the middle, and then the max. So something with like natural gas, usage can vary from year to year. So we might have less, more, whatever, based on what kind of winter we have. So we will have ranges here once we discuss that. With like collective bargaining agreements, that's something that we're discussing, how to discuss, specifics within this group. So we're trying to brainstorm ideas on how to bring this all together. Health Insurance Trust, I actually emailed our broker, Hub Inc., to come up with some sort of analysis to give us a couple scenarios on how the expenses might run over the next 5 years. It's extremely difficult to do because since we're self-insured, partially self-insured, it's based on our utilization. So, if we have a good year, bad year, right now we're running pretty hot. So it's very hard to project that out, but I think with their input, at least we have an independent source kind of providing us with information. We have new growth here. Again, outlying years, it really depends on what other projects are coming in, but we do work closely with the land use and assessing departments to kind of, so we know which projects are being considered and what stages in the permitting process they're at. So we could work on that some. We have a bunch of school expenses here with like the bus contract, special education fleet leases, special ed tuitions that we can populate. We won't have the bids back in time for when this report is due, but in speaking in our last group, we'll try to come up with a number and a range that's feasible, just so we have something in here to display. And then down here, we're working on some possible revenues. Shannon and Tom actually came up with a spreadsheet that are listing, so switch over to that, a bunch of potential revenue streams, who's going to look at that and do some research and reach out to other towns and take some notes. And, we were talking about any potential drawbacks to any of these or consequences to any of these new revenue sources as well. So in my 5-minute spiel, that's where we're at currently. Tom, I might kick it back to you.
Sure. Shannon, I don't know if do you have anything else you want to point out on the new revenue source side?
I don't think so, unless there was anything in this wider audience that we missed that people had as a suggestion for us to explore, or anything they've heard from the community and their travels that we should be adding. I don't know, Dan, you want to maybe just bring back up that list so they can take a quick peek at it. Mostly it's from what I was able to compile from the Hingham report and then the various documents we have from the other towns that Dan had compiled. So if we missed anything or anything that you've heard from folks in the community that we want to add, other than that, I think we're off to a start.
Right. We're targeting getting kind of a draft and a first cut on these together by the 12th, so 2 weeks from today. And I think you have a PDF of this in your inbox. I think Dan got that in front of everybody. So please take a look. If there's anything either that's a revenue source or just a question you think you've heard from the community, like why don't we make money running a lottery or whatever you've heard, there may be things we want to address, even if we're not sort of digging into them as a real potential revenue source.
I have one suggestion.
Sure.
So the sale of land, it could do two things. One, the sale of land, it has to be used, once the proceeds have to be used for another type of project, like a building project. But then if we are selling town-owned land, we then do have property tax revenue coming off of that. So I don't know if your group explored that option at all.
We probably should add it. It was one of the things on Hingham, I think, or maybe it's here somewhere and I missed it, but.
Yeah, I think I just wasn't sure like how much land we really had available like to sell. And so I think that's maybe why.
Yeah.
And I was also
we can,
it's going to be a one-time revenue versus a longer term revenue. So I don't know if that's a consideration about what we want to think about too. I was doing something like a lot of the other opportunities are things that would carry over time versus potentially selling the land and only. You're talking about tax revenue on the flip side, which would be new growth. once it got sold?
No, it would only be it would only be new growth if a building was built upon it. But so right now, any land that the town owns is obviously not taxed. If we were to sell vacant land to a private party, it would then go on the tax roll. If a building or improvements were made to that property, that would be considered new growth, and then we'd be taxing in future years based upon that building.
Why don't we add it to the list, because it is something someone might ask, and it could be the format we're going to use for this is sort of, here's what the opportunity could be, and then sort of a plus minus, like, does this fit with our community values, or not. Great. So if you when you peruse this, have any ideas or there are questions you've heard from the community, please let us know and we'll add that to the list. I guess hopping back to the narrative on the budget challenge side. The budget challenge side. So one question we had was, how do we talk about the some of the items on the budget challenge side? We really can't present, like, getting to competitive salaries is going to cost $2.5 million is some sort of black box. We're going to have to explain that. So I think we've worked through the issue with talked to the WEA and talked to the school committee about it. I think our plan is to share, this is the benchmark community set that our schools use. Here's where it came from and why it's used. Here's what falls out of that in terms of competitive pay and a competitive pay gap. So eventually the document will go into some detail on that. So we'll build out that section, and what schools are going to do is look through the presentation they've already used to present this issue before, pull out anything that seems confidential to the negotiation with the Westford Education Association, and then send that on, and we'll use that as the beginning of that subsection of the budget needs piece.
Tom, when we had talked about that, we'd actually talked about sharing it with our subgroup. Is that something that would be better shared with everybody? Would that be helpful for the other subcommittee as well too? If we just kind of slate that for a time when we're all together? I was just saying that out loud, thinking about it right now.
Yeah, I think that'd be very valuable, because there's a lot there for people to get their heads around, and it's a big number. It's a big part of that. The special education increase. There's a few other things that are really big numbers that we're going to want to spend some time on, and have this group help us prepare to talk to the public about it. So in a future meeting, we'll have Chris and company go through that piece. Might be next time, might be the time after, we can figure that out. But everyone will be able to come up to speed on kind of what that methodology is. The select board did decide that the budget task force would be one of the topics covered at the town retreat in early September. So we can think a little bit about how we'd like to propose to the select board to organize that. Typically, if it's like a listening session roundtable, people would probably come to this event and sign up for one or two or three things that they want to be part of. And then we'd have a round robin of 4 or 5 topic areas that people could move into, blow the whistle, be there for 20 minutes, blow the whistle again, move to the next for 20 minutes. So we can think about how we'd want to handle the budget task force piece. We could decide that if there are 6 of us that can be there that night that aren't otherwise engaged in something, that we'll ask that larger group that comes to break into 6 groups of 10 or some more manageable group and work through some sort of question exercise. We've got a little bit of time to think about that, but that is something we should be planning for. We talked about having kind of a public information session in late July. So it's about a month from now. I still think that's a good idea, and I hope that others can be available for that. We'll have to sort of put together our itinerary or agenda for that pretty soon. What I'm thinking in general is that we go through an outline of what we're looking at, and then carefully share, data that we've found so far that are sort of building blocks of what we're doing, and then leave plenty of time for people to ask questions about, how budgeting works. Help us understand what we need to be explaining better as we move through this. So maybe for next time we can pick a date or propose a date. Maybe we can circulate a Google, not a Google poll, what's called a doodle poll. Are people in general thinking that the last week of July might be an okay time to do it. I mean, summer attendance is not going to be super no matter what, but does that give us enough time to be ready and leave enough space before the strategic session? Christina?
I was just gonna say, I think last week in July or something around that would be fine. We might want to think about setting it now, just because in our working group, we talked about not meeting as a larger group next week because of the holiday, and we figured each subgroup would have a lot to work on. So if we meet the following week, now we're almost into the middle of July, which doesn't give a lot of leeway for people to save a date. I mean, this is a little bit early, but I feel like that could be a little late to start advertising.
Okay, well, good, point taken. Let's quickly do a hand raise. Let's see what's going on that week. Do we already have a select board meeting?
Yes, so
Just like-
Tuesday, the 25th is a select board meeting.
So presumably when the school committee is not meeting right now, so we don't have to worry about that. So I guess the 24th, 26th, or 7th would be the 3 days that week that we could look at. Let's just do a hand raise poll if you can attend. We'll just go through those three and see if we've got a couple good options there. So on the Monday of that week, the 24th, can you attend? Hands up if you can attend. It looks
I
like
assume
everybody.
this is hybrid, right? Or
Yes.
okay,
It'll be hybrid. I'm not sure where we'll hold it. We'll have to think about that, but it might be at the fire station.
Okay.
We've done hybrid sessions in the fire station common room before.
Tom, I just want to say I'm actually going to be out of the country that entire week in the opposite direction there where Christina is. So I'm going to be in Europe that week. So I wouldn't be available, I don't think. Maybe hybrid, depending on the time, and if Christina and I fight over who's asleep and who's awake. But I feel like if Valerie and Jenny and anybody, if people are available, then I can make sure that people have everything that they need, from me in terms of communication, if that becomes a problem.
Yeah, I joined a meeting from Europe for an evening meeting a little while ago. I wouldn't recommend it, especially on vacation. You shouldn't do it. Okay, so that was Monday. All those that could make it Wednesday. Okay, that looks like it's about as good. And then all those who could make it Thursday. Kind of iffy. Was Monday the best read from that poll? I don't know if people feel like Monday is a good day for these meetings. I kind of feel like earlier in the week, people have more energy sometimes.
I'm actually coming off vacation from the week before, so it'll be, if we have anything last minute, I might not be around.
Okay.
Might be good to have a couple days just in case something comes up.
Okay, Kristen, you were a maybe on both Wednesday and Thursday?
Yeah, so I have a family commitment that has not been confirmed or finalized yet. So I hope to know that within the next week.
Would it likely be both nights or one night or the other?
It's going to be either Wednesday or Thursday or the following week. I just don't know yet at this time.
Okay, well, I think it's pretty critical that you're there. Why don't we agree that it'll either be Wednesday or Thursday, and then Kristen, maybe you can just finalize when you know.
Yep, absolutely.
So
Okay.
if just to be clear, if you're speaking about the evening, I can't make it on Wednesday. I have a Clean Energy Committee meeting, and on Thursday, I'm also unavailable, so I wouldn't be there. I can make Monday or Tuesday, but I can't make Wednesday.
Yeah, I can't do Wednesday, but Thursday I can do.
Okay.
But I mean, we're never gonna get all of us there, so
If we put Dan through the ringer on Monday, can everyone make it on Monday? Okay.
I can do Monday. Yep.
Monday.
Monday it is.
Okay. But why don't we decide it's Monday? And sorry, Dan. Okay, so it could be Monday the 24th. That's great. Glad to
We
get
just
that.
don't have any last minute things.
That's right. There's never any last minute stuff, right?
Okay, never.
Never happens.
I always say there's a reason God made the last minute. It's for us to use.
So is that a
Um,
7 o'clock start, 6:30 start? What are you thinking?
I think 7 o'clock probably, to give people who are commuting home a little bit more clearance.
Yeah, I would err towards 7 or 7:30 for just my subset of parenting and bedtimes and all that than my peers.
Okay, and that direction is better for Christina, right? We don't want to be in the morning, but in the afternoon it'll be okay.
Works. That's like 1 p.m. for me. So, I mean, may not be for Chris.
We'll probably be up by 1 p.m. Okay, we glad that we got that on the schedule. A couple other things. I'd meant to go into detail, and people can stay on. I have to leave at 2, but others could stay if they wish. But Erica made a very nice Gantt chart, which lists all the activities and the dates, like all Gantt charts do. My thought was to send it to each of the subcommittees for you to take a look at and populate as best you can with what you think your deliverables are. Maybe that's enough today. We don't, once you see it, if you've ever seen a Gantt chart before, you'll know what it looks like. So maybe Dan, if you could send that out to each of the subcommittee groups, people can take a look at it. In terms of next meeting, it sounds like people want to take next week to focus on doing the subcommittee work. I think that's fine. We could set the next large group meeting for the same time on the 12th, if that works. Everyone seems to be kind of wired into that time. Okay, why don't we plan to do that? And did this way of working work? First meet with the subcommittee and then do a wrap up?
Tom, I'd be happy to lead a few extended minutes if everyone has a few minutes to look at the feedback form.
Okay, why don't we do that? And then since we're doing that, why don't we, Dan and Erica can go ahead and pull up the Gantt chart and go through that.
Okay.
Okay.
What's
Unless there's any-
what's the date for the strategic planning retreat? Just to throw that on my personal calendar. I tried the website, but it looks like it's all last year's information.
Yeah, we haven't posted it yet. Thursday, September 7th, 5 to 8 p.m. And we're planning to get a save the date out this week.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to sign off here. Thank you, Valerie, for picking up. Have a great, I guess, 2 weeks till we see you again. And then each of the subcommittees will get together and work as needed through the course of next week. Happy 4th of July.
Before.
Thanks.
Dan and Erica, you guys want to jump in next?
Oh, sure.
Girl, I'll
Dan, do you
get
want-
up the screen.
So this is just the, you can see at the top, it's got the dates between now and November. So I just in case we wanted to have a go through town meeting, so that's why I included October, but I know we are targeting being done by early October. So, starting off with the deliverables, we have a presentation that we have to make. So I put that just on October 4th. And I also put it, the sections of that just out here. It's same for the report. I assume that can just come shortly afterwards. So the 11th. And then that would also make it available for town meeting. And then in progress updates are the ones that we're required to give to the town, as well as to the public forums that we're planning to do. So further down, you'll see some of those public forums when we get there. And I've incorporated the dates that Dan included in his draft schedule earlier in our meetings. And so those dates are in there. So this is just now talking about the data gathering. So the efforts that you guys have wonderfully been doing on the market basket communities, just putting it into a little more granular tasking as to what's going on there. I think, Kristen, you did a great job pointing out what some of these budget drivers are that you're capturing and how they might be different from town to town. And then there's the same definition of budget drivers for the schools. So, that's some of the tasking that then folds out, brings out, the towns that we might want to look at more closely in terms of what are they doing particularly well, where can we learn? Then getting into outreach a little bit. Yeah. So first, outreach within Westford is the suggestion box, which Valerie will walk us through quickly, or soon, I mean. Talking to department heads, I have that kind of spaced out a bit, talking to the department heads, because I think we're going to want to go back and forth with them through Kristen. And so I just threw some dates out there. We can change that. Public forums, these are the forums, both, you know, to hold the forum and extract feedback, but then we should meet again afterwards and figure out what to do with the feedback that we got. So, you know, I put that as a separate step, just to say, okay, we're going to use that feedback. We're going to figure out how to incorporate it. The strategic retreat, I didn't have the, I guess, no, that's, yeah, I did put it down. So I say we should be ready by the 6th of September, because I think the retreat was just after that. Did I get that right, Kristen? You said the 7th?
7th, correct.
Yeah. So, so we just have to be ready by the 6th, you know, whenever we meet. Then updates to select board, finance committee, and school committee. So these are the 2 dates that were on our schedule. So there's July 25th presentation, as well as the September 12th presentation. Then outreach beyond Westford is what we've been talking about, going to other communities. So I broke them both into efficiencies and new revenues, but, you know, quite possibly different sets of communities for those 2 categories. Okay, you can scroll further. Okay, then getting down into analysis. This is creating budget projections. So I'm trying to create an analysis tool that uses a Monte Carlo type of scenario simulation that'll use the max, most likely, and minimum impacts that we define on the other chart that we went through, to try to spit out in the end what are our minimum, most likely, and maximum budget gaps that we have to resolve through our efforts here. So the first task is to obviously create the tool and also then populate the tool. And that's the estimated costs that are on the other spreadsheet that we've been talking about, both for the costs as well as the possible revenue sources. And then if you want to scroll down a little bit, I did incorporate, and I haven't really figured out how to deal with the hardship impact, but I don't know if we want to have some sort of scale that talks about this, you know, having any cuts to a particular department might impose some sort of hardship on either that department that could result in hardship on the town. Obviously, another form of hardship is the amount of taxes. So just, I haven't figured out how to incorporate that, but it was just a notion that might get incorporated into the tool. And then the scenario analyses are what really is going to be, this tool is hopefully going to help us create the scenarios that we're tasked with providing. So the idea is that we would have a range of scenarios going from those that provide lower services to the citizens of Westford, but have a minimum tax impact, and then going through different scenarios that might end up with level or even higher services, but a higher tax impact. And then, you know, with gradations of the scenarios in between. And then the last thing that you see here is my suggestion that we consider some sort of budget reserve. And I know that the FinCom currently has, I don't know that it's called a budget reserve. And Dan said that that might not be the appropriate reservoir, but that we could have something that ideally would allow for us to cover the gap between what we consider to be a most likely projection of our gap and the maximum gap, right? Because if we try to make sure that we're able to fund what we think is most likely, it's quite possible that we're going to have more of a gap when that year actually comes than we want, if we're targeting most likely. But by having some sort of a fund or a reserve, we might use that reserve both to be able to budget more responsibly rather than always conservatively for every single line item, because we don't max out every line item every year, right? Some of them are plus and minus. And if we max out every line item in our budget, then we have a higher budget than we need. So if we look for the most likely in each of our line items, then I hope I'm making sense here, then, but have a budget reserve, then we might use that reserve to be able to convince some of the department heads to accept lower numbers than they might otherwise, because they'll be assured that if the worst happens within their department, in whatever scenario we're talking about, with the unknowable unknowns, et cetera, then they may, if they feel assured that they're not going to be, bitten because they have a lower budget than they might otherwise like, we might stand better chance of being able to convince them to accept lower numbers in their departments. That's my thinking.
Great.
I don't know if I was clear on all that. If people have questions, you can tell me.
Sure. I think that's great. And I love that you pre-populated it with a bunch of tasks. The budget reserve might be a larger discussion later, but to just get everybody's eyes on the Gantt chart, and it sounds like that'll be sent out to the subcommittees to consider in the next couple weeks. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. I've been working on a feedback form. So I think it should be obvious. Oh, who's the host?
I just made you a co-host, Valerie.
Thank you. I feel like we've been talking on and off about how to engage with the public and get some of the interest that we saw with this committee forming. And we talked about last time a Google form, so that it's not an email address that people expect a response from. So if you're not familiar with Google Forms, this gets pulled into a spreadsheet and would be very easy to sort of collate together if we include things in the report at the end. So this is my draft version. I'm open to feedback. I did pull up, I looked at a bunch of different towns and how they do things, how they've been collecting citizen input on their budget process. Some of them do sort of a yearly comprehensive survey about, like, how do you feel about the services you're receiving as a citizen, and should we put more money there or less money? And then some municipalities just do sort of an open-ended, share your comments, what's your suggestions. This group had, or was it the subcommittee, had given some feedback that maybe some amount of prompts would be helpful, because people with a blank page can sort of freeze up. So that's what I've done. And a link to how to watch us, the meetings and everything is, I think, helpful too in the front. So
Valerie,
yeah.
with those links, I didn't test it when we had looked at this. Those links open in a new window, right? They're not gonna,
That's a
because I think
good
it'd be
question.
unbelievably frustrating for somebody if they're in the middle of it, if they click on a link in the survey and then that's the window that then they lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Great point. And you know what, you can edit the response that you get when you click submit on the form. So I could also sort of copy those links to.
Oh, that would probably be good. Yeah, have them at the end too.
Yeah, great feedback. Thank you. So I just wanted to mention that to someone that's filling it out, that if we did it like the Hingham report and included the feedback, that their words could show up sort of in a public report. So here's a sort of a possible prompts to consider to get someone thinking. Again, this is all open to feedback. I've mirrored this off of bits and pieces that I saw in other places, but do you live or work in the town of Westford? Just kind of a starter question, and then an open long form box for please enter your comments, questions, or suggestions. Christina, I don't think you've seen this wording yet, but this was based on your suggestion about if you'd be willing to be contacted, so that it's not, it's not collecting information. We do allow some anonymity if somebody has some sort of sensitive suggestion, but if somebody has this great thing about this town they used to work in, or something that they've seen, that they could be contacted by one of us if needed. So any quick thoughts on that?
Would it, for the prompts, maybe something about new revenue suggestions? Since that's one of our major items.
Yep. Great, thank you.
And it's something about any suggestions for new revenue sources.
I think if anyone else is sort of reading these and thinking it feels a little touchy to be asking for someone's input without knowing their budget knowledge, I feel like I just want to call that out, right? Like, because it's kind of tricky to be like, oh, which areas would you reduce? And obviously, based on your lived experience, you might be willing to reduce some area that you don't use, right? Or without knowing how the current budget is allocated. So it does feel sort of a little like, I don't know, I just can't put my finger on it, but I do like the idea of providing some amount of prompts to have somebody think, wait, what is my feedback? Not just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, personally, I think the assumption is that you're expecting the respondent to have a personal opinion that's based in their, worldview, right? What they're utilizing, what they're doing.
That's true.
I would assume that we can take that into consideration as we're reviewing responses.
There was a great example that I found. I think this is Ashland, Oregon, and they basically they just split it into two questions. Are you willing to pay higher fees, or where would you reduce? But it's a very comprehensive website where they go into like frequently asked questions. They break down like what possible reductions would it be, and what's the impact of those. And then for some reason these aren't loading today, but it does show some like basic pie charts about the current budget. So I think that would, that's lovely. I don't know that fits on a sort of our runway, because I do want to get something up on the website, I think sooner rather than later.
Some of that seems more like even we could deal with our final deliverables could result in some of that information,
Right.
to something that's accessible that easily on the website. But you're right, for the first round of feedback, we don't necessarily have all that for them.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to suggest, Valerie, is if you might actually put the prompt suggestions in the text box, right? So like where you have please enter your comments, questions, or suggestions, you actually have it right there with the text box as opposed to as a separate place.
Yeah, I can do that. Any other feedback? I can send this out, but I don't want to wait necessarily until the 12th for our next group full meeting to put this up. So,
well, since the prompts are not actual questions that you're asking them to use, then as long as it's still just an open text box, and as long as you don't make any changes to the, to do you live and work in town of Westford, those sections, then if we wanted to update the prompts at any time, we could, and it wouldn't change the actual results.
the collection of data. Yeah.
Right. I guess my only thing is just making sure that I think you were talking earlier about moving those questions down into the answer area, right? The prompt.
Yeah, I could put them like under the underlined and
yeah. So if you did that, I would just caution to make sure that these are candidates. This is an open suggestion area, right? So these are possible things to think about, but just being super clear about that. You don't have to answer these. These are, it's not a quiz. You don't have to answer these at all.
yeah.
Right?
Oh, great. Thank you. Christina?
First of all, I think we should get this out sooner rather than later. Like Chris suggested, it really, we're just interested in that bottom box. So if we decide we want to change some wording later, it's probably not going to make a big difference. My only question or my only comment on the do you live or work in the town of Westford? I guess I was hoping to figure out whether this person was a resident, an employee of the town, or both. Or I mean, I didn't think about the business owner, right? Business owner is paying property taxes, so it could be somebody who does own a business. And I just don't know if these questions would get to that. But I'd be curious to hear what other people think about that option.
I'll just add that it does give the functionality for checking multiple. So I could add a fourth one that says, I am an employee of the town of Westford or something.
Yeah, one thing, and I have I'm not trying to express an opinion, just a thought, is that if we want employees to be able to say, you know, hey, here's an area that might be, I don't know, not quite so efficient as we might like, or if they, you know, if they're saying something that their boss might not like them to say, then having them check a box that reminds them that they're employed just before they put that in might not get us the answer we want. It's just a thought.
Perhaps we don't make it a mandatory field. So right now you have it mandatory. Perhaps it can just be open-ended to make people feel more comfortable.
Is everyone good with that suggestion? I think that's an easy fix.
The other suggestion I had, and we might want to add this in the first pass or the second, is please save the date for July 24th for an open forum, more details to follow. So I think we just solidified that date. So we just don't have the location, but we do know it will be in the evening. So if we could add something related to that, to just have people put that on the calendar before we get something out.
Great feedback. Thank you. I'll work on that and I'll send it over to Dan. You said you could coordinate with Mike Wells to
Yeah.
get it up on the website.
Yeah, we can actually do it in my office with Pam Floric. So
Okay.
just reach out to me. We'll talk.
Okay, great. Okay, did I miss anything? Look for a motion to adjourn
Move to adjourn.
and a second.
So this is
Second.
both subcommittees and regular committee.
Okay. So roll call vote for that with Christina. You seconded. I had a kid at the door.
Yeah, I seconded.
Okay, sorry. Roll call vote. Christina.
Aye.
Erica.
Aye.
Shayna.
Aye.
Amy.
Aye.
Kristen.
Aye.
Dan.
Yes.
Dr. Chu.
I
Jenny.
Aye.
And I am an I. Great. Thank you. We are adjourned.
thank you.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.